Welcome to Pushing Forward with Alicia, a podcast that gives disability a voice. Each week, we will explore topics like confidence, ambition, resilience, and finding success against all odds. We are creating a collective community that believes that all things are possible for all people. Open hearts, clear paths, let's go. Welcome back to Pushing Forward with Alicia. I'm Alicia, and we are so excited to have you back for another episode. I have a great friend and colleague spending some time with us today. His name is Brian McCormick. He is the CEO and founder of Hummingbird Humanity. He is a consultant, a speaker, an author, and a facilitator with over 25 years of experience in DEI, HR, culture change management, internal communications, and employee experience. He is an openly gay man and a person with a disability who shares his life experiences in service of fostering workplaces where humans are able to thrive. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you on. Thank you so much for your time today. I just read your bio and gave all your accolades, but can you give us any extra little details?
Well, first of all, Alicia, thank you so very much for inviting me to be part of your podcast. You know, I'm a huge fan of yours, and I've loved every time we've had a conversation, whether it's been in front of others, like in our virtual live audiences, or just even behind the scenes. I always feel like I learned something from you. So thank you for inviting me here. What I believe is that when I started working in corporate America, and then this is true for probably many of you out there, I knew that I was supposed to like take off my coat of emotions and sort of put my humanity to the side and go fill the job description, this box that I was put into of like, this is what you do and you need to show up that way. And the reality is we can't put our humanity to the side. It comes with us wherever we go. And so we try to celebrate that in how we introduce ourselves at Hummingbird, to acknowledge that we need to bring our humanity and acknowledge our humanity, as well as sort of, you know, so who we are as well as what we do. So you've heard all the things about what I do. As I think about myself as an organizational change expert, and I work on organizational change through a variety of different lenses. Right now, it's really largely through inclusive workplaces where people belong, humans thrive. And that's, you know, the work I love, and I'm so grateful I get to do it. It's not easy, as you well know, Alicia, but I love it. And of course, you know, I'm gay and disabled, but, you know, there's so much more to me than that. I sang with the New York City Gay Men's Chorus, so I like to sing. I'm a dog dad to Bosco, who is our chief happiness officer at Hummingbird, and he was a medical research dog for 7 years. So he is his own beautiful soul on the planet, and he helped to test medicines for humans. I am really close to my family. I became an uncle earlier this summer, so that's really exciting. It's the first grandchild for my parents, you know, I like to travel, but I generally travel to either experience something with people I love or to go visit people I love. So there's a few other things a little about me. Oh, I guess I should mention I'm a military brat. So sometimes I say I'm a citizen of the world because people are like, where are you from? I'm like, that's complicated. So I just say, you know, I'm a citizen of the world, although I identify as a New Yorker.
Oh, okay, good. If you're comfortable, are you able to share anything about what your disability might be? I think the intersections of identity is pretty important. So
probably the two big ones is my mental health stuff and HIV. And, you know, sometimes when I talk about HIV, one thing that I recognize, and so if anyone's out there listening and you're like, I don't know how to feel about someone who just shared the HIV positive, surprisingly common for people to have a difficult reaction to that information. So I understand that I have a responsibility when I choose to share that diagnosis, that sometimes it may inflict unintentional trauma on someone else for any number of reasons. When I found out I was positive, medication had moved to a place where I could take, at that time it was two pills a day. Now I take one pill once a day. The virus is not affecting me and I can't give it to anyone else. So it's a whole different ballgame today. But if you're still stuck with that imagery in your head from the 80s and early 90s, it can be really scary when you hear that someone's positive. So I'm okay. And certainly the med science has come a long way. And hopefully that's helpful information for someone out there.
Well, I think that's part of the work of wherever we're comfortable sharing our experiences, because the path of disability, whether it's non-apparent anxiety.
I mean, my disability identities are invisible, and you wouldn't know about them unless I choose to share them. with the exception of, mental health is something that you might experience of someone else going through a mental illness, an episode of mental illness. So you can see and experience that in some way, shape, or form if you're paying attention and you're close to someone. But generally, it's, most days I'm just fine, and you wouldn't know that either of those experiences are part of my life. And what you would see, and this is something thank you for bringing this question up, Alicia, because it's also important for me to acknowledge that for those of you who are listening, unless you've seen my picture, wouldn't know I'm also a white cisgender man. And I'm also 6 feet 6 inches tall. I'm heteronormative, so I fit into the typical stereotype of what masculinity looks like. So when I have those, when you name those and recognize those collection of attributes that make me fit into the ideal of what corporate America was built for, is people who look like me and who show up like me. And so some people, like when I get on stage, sometimes the first thing I'll do is I'll look out in the audience and I'll be like, you're all wondering why the white guy's up here on stage talking about diversity, aren't you? And, I get a lot of chuckles, but I get a sea of nodding heads, like every head in the room nods. And, one thing I say first is that we need white guys to be part of this work. So I'm one of those white guys who's part of this work because they believe it's so important for those who've been marginalized in our systems of the world, certainly in workplace environments. But I'm also someone who's experienced what it feels like to be othered, or to be an outsider, or to be different. And I don't want anyone else to feel that way. And if I can be part of the change that allows, as you shared earlier, allows humans to thrive in the workplace, then I want to be part of that change and use the skills I have and the passion I have for this work to make a difference.
I love both of those points that you just brought up. And I think they're very impactful to create change, not only in our society, but specifically in the workplace as well. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I couldn't possibly agree more about the value and importance of community. And, the chorus has made a huge difference in my life.
So I read somewhere, I think it was on your website or something, that your identity has given home to powerful perspectives of well-being in the workplace. And so my question to you is, first of all, why DEI? Did that start before or after you started kind of identifying with all of your layers? And can you tell us a little bit about this powerful perspective philosophy and what that means?
When I started doing DEI work, I would say that social impact work was really the external expression of DEI work, and that's I still think that's true, and I think it's also bigger than that in many ways. When you bring in sustainability efforts and ESG efforts, but those of course can have DEI lenses. And then as I continue to sort of think this through, it also includes what I call human-centered leadership. So the things that we need to be embracing as leaders today to meet the needs of the humans that work in our workplaces, and honoring well-being. Well-being is often the sort of like set of activities that happens in workplaces, but doesn't really fully embrace the potential of well-being. So that's what this framework's all about. There are two moments that I'll highlight before I entered workplace environments. So the first was, growing up, I was always different. I always felt like I was I always felt like I never really fit in. I felt like I wasn't included. Part of that was because I was always awkwardly tall. I'm awkwardly thin, and I didn't really act like other boys, and I didn't have the same interests as other boys, and so all of those things. And I remember having a conversation with my parents once, and asking them, like, am I painting this picture of my childhood in a way that isn't honoring the reality of what it was like to grow up as a white boy in America? And they're like, no, that was you, and you always wanted others to feel like they were included. So that was like just who you were, because you didn't like the feeling of like not being part of things. So I think that's part of the foundation of who I was as a human. And I grew up with parents that expected my sister and I to treat everyone with respect, regardless of who they were. So that that all comes together, I think, from a foundational perspective. How do I do this work in the way that honors what I'm here to do to really change systems that allow for all humans to thrive? And as part of that journey, I started to, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, I started to look at, well, DEI so often is introduced to organizations in this silo or this other thing, and it needs to be part of everything.
What does a well-being program look like?
There are a variety of different. So I think one of the first things I would offer, if you're in the role of defining or designing a well-being program, is figuring out what is needed for the people in your organization. So one of our beliefs at Hummingbird is that we start with the belief that the people in your organization are unique from the people in the organization next to yours and the one next to theirs. And so you need to understand, what do the people in your organization need? What's important to them? So sometimes well-being is mental health programs. And there's certainly lots of great offers and services you can offer there, but it's also telling the stories about mental illness and helping to elevate those conversations. And that's one example of many different disabilities.
This is a perfect time to take a quick break. You are listening to Pushing Forward with Alicia, and we will be right back. If you're an employer looking to motivate and inspire your team through the power of diversity and inclusion, and learn more about disability inclusion in the workplace and how to include disability into your DEI efforts, please check out my keynote speech offerings on aliciaanderson.com. That's ALYCIA Anderson with an O.com. Click on speaking. Welcome back to Pushing Forward with Alicia. I'm Alicia, and we are so excited to have you back for another episode. I have a great friend and colleague spending some time with us today. His name is Brian McCormick. He is the CEO and founder of Hummingbird Humanity. You left corporate. You started your own business. You're an entrepreneur. You are helping your customers. You fill in the blank.
We typically work with companies and organizations that the way that I describe it is they're big enough to need strategy around their workplace culture and the elements of workplace culture, but aren't big enough that they've been able to buy all of the expertise that they need to be able to do that work. And so that's typically where we lean in, is we help company or organization first to understand where they are today. And so we assess where, we do an assessment and help paint that picture. And we paint the picture through a variety of different lenses. We do head and heart perspectives, so numbers and analytics and stats and things of that nature, but also quotes and messages from your actual the people that work there. So we can really illuminate this multifaceted, complex picture of what is your culture like today, and then have a conversation about where do you want to go? What do you want your people to feel like? And let's anchor that in the voices of the people that work here. Because I can come in and say, like, here's what I think it should be, but if I don't work there, like, it's not about me. It's about the people, the humans that are part of that organization and know what's right for that organization and that community. And we anchor our workplace culture efforts in DEI methodologies, in change management principles, and communication mechanisms to make sure, because communication is often what's forgotten in these programs. They don't work without change management. And certainly if we want to be part of the change that allows all humans to thrive, it has to be anchored in an understanding of systemic oppression. So we bring those elements into how we help organizations evolve their workplace culture. I think that's part of the foundation of who I was as a human. And I grew up with parents that expected my sister and I to treat everyone with respect, regardless of who they were, so that, that all comes together, I think, from a foundational perspective. And in college, I read a book called The Customer Comes Second by Hal Rosenbluth. And that is all about how if companies create workplaces, again, the language I use is where humans thrive, then they're going to do great work. And the great work is then going to impact the success of your company and, reach your customers and clients. So that's been part of, the combination of those two things, I think, was always part of who I was as an HR professional. When I was at Disney, I struggled at Disney to what I call and have referred to as fitting in. And I just recently heard Brene Brown, a clip of Brene Brown talk about how the opposite of belonging is fitting in, because fitting in is how are you making yourself fit into this other environment. And you're not your true self. You're like, I'm going to put on this shirt. I'm going to put on these sunglasses. I'm going to put on these shoes. I'm going to adopt these ways of saying things or doing things because I need to fit in, rather than I get to bring who I am and bring that magic to the environment.
I'm going to pretend like I don't need accessibility, and it's not okay to self-identify, and it's not, and fit into the box. I think that I can relate to that too. Wow. Before I ask you the final question, did we miss anything? Because I want to make sure that we squeezed all the juice that was super important to you today. I think we had a great conversation, but did we miss anything that you would like to share?
Yeah, there was one story I alluded to early on that I should probably just share it in the spirit. I promised the story, and it was also a powerful moment of where the two disabilities that I've talked about really intersected. So in September of 2008, I was diagnosed as HIV positive, and I was one of those people who still had the imagery from the 80s and early 90s in my head, and so death was what appeared on my mind, not life and not necessarily hope. That moment ignited a significant episode of depression and anxiety. And I worked at an organization at the time that I don't remember there being messages that you could talk about these things there. So I didn't know how to talk about my diagnosis, and I certainly didn't know how to talk about my mental health challenges at the time. And I'm not saying that that's anything that the company did wrong or the people I work with did wrong. I just don't think that that was necessarily my experience. So I just tried to show up every day and do my job. So I didn't take a leave of absence, which I think in hindsight I probably should have. Well, what that experience was certainly for me, I was lost. And I was physically at work every day. Like the physical being of Brian McCormick was in the office every day, but he wasn't really doing his job. And that experience for my colleagues was like, well, why doesn't he have to do his job? Like, why do I have to pick up the things that he's not doing? Why is this happening? And it increased their frustration and their anger. And I felt some of that, and I'm sure they really tried not for me to experience that. And I think they're great humans who would have been like, if they would have known the story, they would have helped me figure that out and way through that in a very different way than the path I chose. But it was just like, it didn't work for any of us. So when I think about, the conversations we have around how do we create workplaces and cultures where humans thrive? Yes, it's about someone like me who in that moment really needed to be cared for and supported. But it's also equally important for the people I worked with who were like, I don't know what's happening right now, but this doesn't feel good, and don't have a way to work through it or name it or to be part of the solution. And I think that was not only unfair to me, but unfair to them. And I certainly wish I could go back and rewrite that story in so many different ways. But I think that's, I remember that story a lot as I'm doing this work, because I remember like, it's not only the people that are marginalized that are impacted, it's everyone who's impacted. So which then honors that whole concept of environments, workplace cultures where humans thrive. So
I think that's really a nice last thought there. And it definitely shows why you're doing the work that you're doing. I think you're doing really good work there in creating that space. So congratulations on all of your accomplishments. How do our listeners find you?
So I am certainly on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to find me. You can search for Brian McCormick, which is Brian with an I, MCCOMAK. It's a unique spelling, so I'll say it again, MCCOMAK. So that's probably the best place to find me. And then if you want to connect with Hummingbird, visit hummingbirdhumanity.com, and you can check out what we have going on there. You can join our newsletter, and certainly Hummingbird is also on LinkedIn. So that's another place to follow what we're doing.
We like to have a final pushing forward moment to send our listeners off with something, a mantra, something that might inspire them in their own spaces, whether it's in the workplace or in their lives. What is one little gift that you could give away?
I think that this conversation has centered a lot around my battles with anxiety and depression, and so this is what I'll offer is this tool that there's probably a collection of things I've learned from professionals. Is the first thing I do is I just stop and try to quiet my mind, and I say, am I okay right now? The starting point of am I okay right now then moves me to what am I grateful for in my life, and what are the things that I can be grateful for today in this moment, and centering in today, and particularly in the now, is what usually then helps me get to a place, get out of that what was about to become something that could have been problematic into a space that is healthier, and then I can say, okay, I'm okay, and I have a lot to be thankful for. life is not perfect. Life is never perfect. It's never going to be perfect. That's not really the goal anyway. But I'm okay. And now I can tackle whatever's ahead of me.
Brian, thank you so much. You're doing great work. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in again. This is Pushing Forward with Alicia, and that is how we roll on this podcast. If you're an employer looking to motivate and inspire your team through the power of diversity and inclusion, and learn more about disability inclusion in the workplace and how to include disability into your DEI efforts, please check out my keynote speech offerings on aliciaanderson.com. That's ALYCIA Anderson with an O.com. Click on speaking.